continuing through the AAMC's official MCAT study guide psychology section, going through every pre-med's favorite topic, stress. Tell me all about stress, Small. I'm just dying to hear about it.
So what exactly is stress? We probably need to start with that.
Yeah.
And that would be our response to challenging situations. And it obviously differs between people. And I think that's pretty well evidenced between you and I. But we just handle it differently. We also perceive things as a stressor versus not a stressor, but differently between us. So that is a good thing to keep in mind as far as stress goes.
Yeah.
But when we're, evaluating our environment, we need to be able to determine what is a stressor to us and what is not. And so cognitive appraisal meaning looking at the situation and determining something.
Right.
So thinking about the subjective evaluation of a situation that induces stress.
I always like to think about that. So my mother's a real estate agent, and they have appraisers in the real estate world, which basically the appraiser goes to a house, and then based on what the appraiser thinks, they give you a value for the house.
Okay.
So this would be cognitive appraisal. This is your own appraisal of this situation and seeing how much stress is this.
Exactly. So the first thing we do, primary appraisal, would be just looking at my environment and is this thing a stressor or not?
Right.
And so
that's a yes/no kind of thing, right?
Yep. And so there's a couple of different categories. So it could be irrelevant. So, no, it's not a stressor. Positive or benign. So positive will end up being something we define as eustress. And so it is yes, but it's not a negative stress. And then stressful, just simply stressful. Then it's just a yes, but it's negative for us. And so if it is stressful, if this thing in our environment is causing us some amount of distress, then we do secondary appraisal. Can I cope with this? So is it going to cause me harm? Is it a threat to me? Is this a challenge that I can overcome and benefit from in the future? So is it a eustress, that positive stress? And then reappraisal. Do I need to keep checking in on this thing? Could the status of it change? Like if I'm James Bond and there's a bad guy chasing me, do I need to keep looking over my shoulder?
Right.
Okay.
James Bond.
Yeah, well, that's the first thing that came to mind.
No one chases James Bond. He chases them.
Oh, is that how? I haven't seen a lot.
I don't know. I played the video game for the N64 when I was a kid.
I was going to say, like, when Anakin is chasing was it episode 2, I think, and he's, no, maybe at the beginning of 3, I don't know, but he's chasing the girl who's a changer.
Yes,
it's totally
that was 2.
3 because
no, that was 2.
No, you're right, 2 because Padme's sleeping when the centipedes crawl up. And, yeah. Okay. Anyway, yeah, but so when the changer's getting chased by Anakin, and is Obi-Wan with him?
Yeah.
Okay.
Remember, because they're in the car and then he jumps out.
They're in the car.
The flying car.
Oh, I hate when he does that.
Exactly.
Okay. Anyway.
#prequel memes.
Yeah. So there's a couple of trends that we talk about when we talk about stress. And so people with a high self-efficacy tend to have less stress than those who don't think they can cope with these different stressors.
Okay.
And so that would kind of make sense, right? If I have a low self-efficacy, I don't believe in my ability to do a lot of things. And so when something comes up, it's a giant roadblock. It's a big problem.
And efficacy, so self-efficacy, you see that term also a lot in practice tests and probably on the real MCAT. So self-efficacy just means, in very no uncertain terms, your ability to your belief that you have the ability to do something.
Yeah.
Okay. So in this sense, it would be to handle a stressful situation, which if you have a high self-efficacy, if you have a high perceived ability to handle stress, you probably won't be as stressed.
Yep. Exactly. And so the second trend that we wanted to mention was appraisal and stress levels are different for everyone. We've already kind of talked about this. But something that might be stressful to me would look like a really fun, good challenge to Tal, and vice versa. And so just everyone is different. So these definitions are set, but the how they are perceived from everyone is different. That was a weird English sentence that
we didn't get degrees in spelling.
Yeah, there we go. I'm not a good talker. So there's different types of stressors. And so the first one Okay, so basically, a stressor is kind of intrinsically makes sense. Anything that can cause a stress response.
Right.
So Tal has talked a lot about the relaxation response that you can have to counter this, but a stress response would be something like cortisol.
Yeah.
So an increased sympathetic stimulation.
Right. Yeah. Stressor would cause that sympathetic nervous system to kick in, whereas something like meditation or yoga or run archery, which I'm trying to get into, can force your body to have an opposite response.
The non-Norwegian biathlon.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So environmental stressors would be like extreme temperature, loud sounds, inclement weather. So like my pups, and if there's a thunderstorm, that's a big no-no in our house.
Right.
Thunder does not go over well with the pups. Or daily events can even be stressors. So like me running late or losing things tall.
Yeah.
Or little unexpected setbacks, which we've talked about in the lab a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So they can often seem like stressors when you're trying to get something done, but like such and such is not restocked, or you need to go prepare this other solution to use. And how we think about those things could be different from person to person, but they could be a big stressor to somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And then social expectations, so pressure from an outside source that is a human. So family, friends, or society. Chemical, biological. Your diet can affect your stress levels.
Absolutely.
Alcohol, drugs, viruses, allergies, medications, disease. And I would also mention maybe toxins. So like if you live in a toxic, moldy environment, you could probably see some effects.
Yeah, it's such a fragile system, and there's so many points where it is vulnerable, I suppose, your stress response. And that's biologically important. I think, just from an evolutionary perspective, if you have lots of different ways in which your body can elicit this response, and this response is supposed to help you cope with bad situations, then it would make sense that it would be relatively sensitive.
Yeah.
Problem is, we improperly activate it a lot and all the time in the modern environment.
So how we eat, the fact that we don't go outside and exercise and things like that.
Yeah.
So
if we're eating a ton of I think a very, very high sugar diet kicks it in, because I think your body is, well, okay, so an easier example is you're stressed over, you have a paper due, and you're stressing because you got to get it done, and maybe you're not writing as much as you need to be because you don't understand something, so you get very stressed. I'm in that situation right now. So you get very stressed, and your body is feeling the exact same response that you would feel if you're being chased by a bear. However, when you're getting chased by a bear, presumably you get away from the bear, and you end up with that relief, that reward of like, oh, thank God I'm alive. However, when you do this paper and you just get stressed, you just stay stressed, and you slowly get like less stressed, but you don't quite get less stressed, and then it kind of trains your body to know that every time you're doing this kind of thing, stress.
Yeah.
So it's just we're really messing with ourselves in the modern world.
Another thing that can be a stressor to humans is frustration, lack of perceived predictability in our daily lives, and lack of control. So lack of predictability, I would say, it reminds me of like the ER. Mm-hmm. And for nurses who work there, they might be really good at not perceiving, fluctuation and predictability as a stressor. So maybe that's why they're really good there. Like they can handle 10 million different situations in one day, and versus someone who is maybe a nurse that focuses on one area of the hospital, and if something different pops up, it's a little bit of a stressor.
Yeah.
And so the best example of lack of control I can give is they did a couple of studies in nursing homes, and it was like perceived happiness and self-efficacy and all sorts of things. And The only thing they changed between the two different groups was that one was just given dinner every night, and the other group was told that they could choose from a couple of different things. And because they had a perceived ability to control part of their environment, they reported that they felt like they had more value
and agency over their lives.
Exactly.
Yeah, and the predictability, the lack of control, that's another big point of mine. So I'm very interested in stress, and I almost kind of want to make it a huge part of my medical practice going forward. And I believe very strongly in habits, and I've read several books about happiness and de-stressing, I guess, that all center around when you have a discipline, when you have good habits, when you have a schedule that you follow throughout the day. Those people tend to be the happiest when they're not, even if we would consider oh, well, we stay out late and we go out with our friends and then we sleep in just on the weekends or something like that. But what you find is that over time, those people, because then during the week they have to wake up earlier for work, and then that's not what they're used to, and it's like a fluctuation. It keeps you on edge and makes stress happen.
Right.
So it's an interesting parallel to the nursing home.
Yes. So we'll run through these different stressors one more time. You can have environmental, daily events, workplace or academic setting, social expectations, chemical, biological, frustration, lack of control, lack of predictability. Cataclysmic events, I think, sounds like something that would be very large.
Yeah.
And so there's something that's called new stress. So we talk about distress is something that's a stressor and is negative for you. And then there's eustress, which is something that's like a challenge. So it's a stressor, but it is the potential to be something very positive for you. And then there's something called new stress, which is like a cataclysmic event. And it may not have anything to do with you, but it's a stressor because it's something terrible that's happened to other people or, other organisms in a different area in the world. So like if a hurricane were to hit a different country, you might not be affected by it or know anyone that was affected. But it was a stressor for you because you know that someone else has maybe lost a child or something like that.
I remembered, this is a bit outdated at this point, but I remembered when the Bataclan happened, and it was in Paris. There was a big shooting at the Bataclan, and that was one of the first times in my life that I was I was alive during 9/11, but I was, I don't know, very young. 7 or 8 years old or something. So I remember it, but I don't remember, I never had that real big connection to it. However, I remember when the Bataclan happened, I was like 20-something years old, and I remembered watching TV and like feeling scared and really feeling stress, and I put myself in their shoes really at that moment.
So the empathy of being a human.
Right. So that would be new stress, that stress that I was feeling at that time.
So it's a cataclysmic event stressor.
Right.
So conflict is just in general when something comes up and you need to make a decision. I think we've kind of given it the what is the word? The connotation of being negative, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. So anytime that you have a bad choice, it's an avoidance choice. Anytime you have a good choice, it's approach. So you can have approach where you are either going to go get ice cream or margaritas after dinner, and you're like a little bit stressed because you're not sure which one you're going to choose because they're both good choices.
So I would approach both of those choices as like beneficial things.
Yep. So that is approach. And then avoidance would be between two bad options.
So lesser of two evils.
Right, exactly. A rock and a hard place.
Yeah.
All sorts of sayings for it. And then approach avoidance, one option, but it has good or bad sides. So that one is a little more complicated because you think, oh, there's one good option and one bad. Well, then there wouldn't even be a choice.
Yeah.
So it would be within one choice, but there's a good and bad side to it. So I've got, good news, bad news kind of deal.
Okay, yeah.
But it's a choice to relieve or ameliorate some kind of conflict.
Okay, yeah. So there's a good side and a bad side to choosing that option.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
And so the different outcomes and responses that we can have to stressors, we need to talk about physiological first because that's kind of important. we mentioned that this would be stuff like cortisol, sympathetic stimulation, so fight or flight. You know, there's a bear, I need to run from the bear. 2 + 2.
Right.
That kind of deal. Increased heart rate, decreased digestion, right? Decrease that rest and relax, and rest and digest. That's it.
Yes.
And so one of the things we always talk about when you have a physiological response to stress would be gas.
You have gas.
Have you heard about gas before?
I actually have not heard this acronym.
So it is general adaptation syndrome, and it has 4 different stages. And so the first one, you would kind of be in homeostasis, and then something would happen that would throw you out of it. So some stressor would occur, some conflict would occur.
You get an email from your professor.
Right. Yeah.
With a heading that says, "We need to talk."
Yep. Or a spouse or something like that. That would be a big deal. So your alarm would be the first stage when something happens that is a stressor.
Right.
And so it's your initial reaction where the hypothalamus is, you know, something is telling it, hey, you're not in homeostasis anymore. So it releases adrenocorticopic hormone. Man, that's the first time I've messed that up. And so that's the stuff that eventually helps us wake up. That's the precursor to, you know, forming cortisol.
Yeah.
And that will eventually tell the adrenal cortex glands to produce cortisol, which will help us keep enough sugar floating around in our blood to get to our muscles to allow us to have fight or flight.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, and then our adrenal medulla, to help with this response, will produce norep and epinephrine, which is also known as adrenaline. So, you know, from your adrenal glands, that would make sense. Thank you, biologists.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so in the stage of alarm, nothing has happened yet other than you have initiated a physiological response, so your body is prepping you to run from the bear.
So I think a common thing that everyone could relate to here is you're in traffic and all of a sudden you see red lights on the car in front of you stops really quickly.
Yeah.
You get that feeling in your stomach and in your chest of just like that panic feeling.
Yes.
That's the actual physiologic start the stress.
Right. And so then you'll have, you know, increased levels of cortisol. You have a bunch of adrenaline running around your body. Running around. You know what I mean.
I've now anthropomorphized adrenaline just sprinting through my body, trying to just mess stuff up in a panicked fashion.
I was just thinking of, like we were talking about in cell bio, like the walking along microtubules. Mm-hmm. And then I just said it like they were just running along the microtubules, you know. Whatever, floating around the body.
Yeah.
And so stage 2 is what allows you to keep running from the bear, because the bear is still chasing you. So you don't just like run for 10 feet and then die of exhaustion. You can keep running for a good long while. And people who experience really traumatic, terrible things, like maybe someone who escaped from a kidnapper or something like that, can run much longer than if they just went for a run one day, you know, even if they're out of shape. And that's the adrenaline rush that they get.
Almost seems like Yerkes Dodson. Like there's a curve there.
There is.
For performance.
Yes, and because it's a physical task, it would be considered simple. Mm-hmm. And so the more arousal you have, there is not a drop off. So if you are more aroused, you will tend to do better for very simple tasks.
Interesting.
Yep. And so stage 2 is resistance and those hormones staying in your body so that you can continue to run from what you need to run from. Mm-hmm. Or do whatever you need to do. Maybe it's taking a test. And then eventually you will reach a point where your body cannot keep up. You can't keep up an elevated sympathetic nervous system that long.
You've run out of resources readily at hand.
Exactly. And when you do really reach exhaustion, this is when you're susceptible to illness, organ system damage, trouble reproducing, and decreased immunity. And that goes along with just getting sick. But this really makes me think of finals week for people. Exactly.
And this is the you know, the new world's, modern world's stress that we see. That, you know, we bring ourselves to exhaustion, but we never, you know, because most of the time we're supposed to experience the stress, so a really good visual is this chart we have in front of us. You have resistance on the y-axis, time on the x-axis. So your resistance goes down during the alarm stage, but then it builds up and builds up because you're producing more cortisol. You can resist this stress, you can deal with it, but then eventually in the exhaustion stage, it goes down. The way it should go is, you know, once you're done with resistance, you just exhaust, and then you rebalance to homeostasis. What tends to happen is that on a daily basis, people will get stressed and it'll be a very, very, very slow come down. And you're just getting exhausted all day long, every single day. That's why you get these chronic illnesses like stomach ulcers, fertility issues, immunity issues. You're getting sick all the time because you're constantly just exhausting yourself over a long period of time.
Yeah, that makes me think of Helicobacter, so H. pylori. And I think they tend to be able to do their job better, so burrowing into the stomach lining in order to get away from some of the acidity. And they tend to be able to penetrate more when we're stressed out, and those environments are more favorable to pathogens.
Yeah.
All sorts of getting sick works that way.
Right.
Take care of your body's pre-meds.
Yeah, seriously.
So, so you can have emotional responses to stressors. So you could be irritable, moody, tense, fearful, helpless. You can have difficulty concentrating and remembering. You can have all sorts of emotional responses. It can be highly not fun to be around. And then you can also have behavioral responses. So antisocial behavior, substance use, aggression, suicide, anxiety, and depression. And, you know, saying all of these as a big, long string sounds like I'm reading off side effects in a commercial.
Yeah.
For, like, a drug or something. And I think it's important for us to realize that these things are more serious. Like, maintaining a level of cortisol that is so high in the body all the time can have lasting chronic effects for us. Yeah.
And I do immediately, you know, you start to see which ones do you tend to exhibit. And that could have something to do with how you deal with stress. I know for me, I don't tend to have an emotional response to high stress. I go running, and I don't want to be around people, but I don't necessarily get like, you know, I don't want to be emotional to someone else. I just want to be mad and go run. Managing it is, well, the entire key, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And so managing is different for everyone. So Tall goes running. We have another friend, you know, his name is Yoda. He does a lot of meditation with his Jedi training. And so you can look at it in kind of two broad, different plans of attack, kind of. So the first one would be problem-based. How am I going to tackle this problem specifically? I need someone who's going to help hold me accountable, so I need social support, and I need exact like goals and things to keep me accountable, so I need a plan of action. And the other side of that is, how am I going to react to this problem in the future? So maybe I don't need to, maybe I can't take away this problem, but how can I change my emotional response to it? So it makes me think of someone who maybe they've developed MS and they can't get that function back, but they can change how they respond to having a big flare-up.
Yeah.
And so they've decided that's how they're going to tackle the problem, through an emotion-based plan of attack. So, and that's like taking responsibility, having self-control, distancing yourself from the problem if you can, and focusing on the positive outcomes, like this is almost over or something like that.
It's kind of like you're building up resistance.
Yes.
To future stress. And that's an important part of stress, is that when it does take over, you have to just say, like, all right, how do I make this not happen again? How do I make myself stronger against it the next time that I have this kind of environment, or this kind of any of the other types of stressors that we brought up earlier.
Yep. So you can either tackle that specific problem and remove it from your environment, or you can change how you react to it. And when you change how you are coping with a stressor, it can either be adaptive, so some sort of healthy response, so like Tall goes running. And then I've in the past we have a punching bag in my garage, and I really like that for when I'm angry. It really helps, and it's an adaptive, healthy way of coping with anger, because then I don't take it out on anyone. Maybe if I don't mean to get snappy, but if I were to not go punch the punching bag, maybe I would be snappy with my brother or something. Versus maladaptive, and this would be unhealthy coping. Mal meaning bad, kind of makes sense. So like maybe someone turns to drugs. So maybe someone goes home and pours way too much alcohol in a whiskey glass because they had a really rough day at work.
Yeah. Another very common maladaptive coping mechanism that not a lot of people think about, or you're just not cognizant of until it becomes a real issue, is eating.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, stress eating. It's a real thing.
Yep.
A lot of people don't think about it that way.
And along the lines of like harmless things that are actually ways in which we respond to stress, kind of downing caffeine in order to stay up and deal with the stressor is a maladaptive way. So if you get better at time management and it's a problem-based solution where you're fixing how you even go about tackling the problem day to day, and then you don't have to stay up the night before and do all of the studying before the test and drink a gallon of caffeine.
Right. Because then you're putting yourself into the environment, into the situation where you need to cope with it with your maladaptive coping mechanism, which would be caffeine at that point.
Exactly. And then it's a spiral because then you need more caffeine the next day to get up and go to your classes.
Yep. And then before you know it, you're on Adderall.
Oh, no. And so we've already mentioned distress and eustress before, but I'm going to mention it one more time. I don't think it's high yield, but I think it's important to understand. So distress would be an unpleasant stressor. Anything mentioned above, even from like a cataclysmic event happening in a different country to I'm late or I can't find my keys. So those are distresses. Eustress would be positive conditions. Like getting married is kind of a stressor for people. It's a big thing to plan. A lot of stuff goes into it. There's a lot of people involved. You also bring in emotions from like family and all of that. So getting married can be a stressor, even though it's something the person's looking forward to.
Yeah.
Getting a good MCAT score. Most people actually end up really enjoying studying for the MCAT. It just is a stressor because it's something that's so important.
Yeah, there's a lot of implications based on how well you do, even though actually doing it is kind of fun.
Right, exactly. And graduating college is another example. So the big thing with eustress, I would mention that it's positive conditions, and it's anytime you have a lifestyle change. So even if you're moving up in the world and you're moving away to grad school or something, because you are changing part of your lifestyle, there will be a certain amount of stress.
Yeah, like moving away to medical school.
Exactly.
You're potentially in a whole new place, and not only are you in a whole new place, but that lifestyle change, it's not school as you know it. It's becoming a doctor. Because at that point, there's a reason that, almost every med school has like a 95% attrition rate. Or wait, no. Attrition. That means people who drop out. 95% make it through rate. And
that was some hand-wavy science right there.
Yeah, that was some hand-wavy grammar. But there's a reason that they have that, and it's because that's not the point of medical school. The point of medical school is to make you a doctor. And it's, you've already passed your test of having, hard tests and examinations and things like that. Therefore, there's a very different expectation and a very different lifestyle that you have to adapt when you go to medical school, and you have to learn how to study and really take your learning into your own hands more than you could have imagined during your undergrad.
Right. So a problem-based approach to managing that kind of stress would be, I'm going to do such and such every single day in order to avoid getting a bad grade on whatever test it is or whatever. And then also approaching it with a different attitude. So we said that attitude has an emotional component, and that emotional component would be like approaching it as, oh, this is fun. And also, this is not something I have to do. This is something I get to do.
Exactly.
To get to the job that I want to have every day, that I look forward to going to.
I remember we've talked about before with some other friends of ours who are pre-meds that specifically in organic chemistry.
Yep.
That all of us did really well in organic chemistry, and organic chemistry in so many schools is, and for pre-meds especially, that's one of the
weed out classes.
And but for a lot of us who are more, I guess, promising pre-meds, like we're more serious about it, because I'm not gonna beat around the bush. There are people who aren't as serious about it.
Right.
But for the people that really are taking it seriously, and this is our life, we got to the point in organic chemistry where we made it fun.
Yep.
Even if it wasn't fun, I'm going to make this fun. I'm going to make this, this is what I do with my friends. I do organic chemistry. I study for tests. And before you know it, the thought of doing other things like, yeah, that'd be nice, but it's not really any
as
different.
fun.
Like,
Yeah.
I don't care that, you know, when I'm doing organic chemistry or something, when I was studying for organic chemistry, I wasn't thinking the whole time, like, dang, I want to get this done so that I can go do the fun thing.
Right.
It was that, okay, this is a fun thing. I get to do it with my friends, and I enjoy doing it just as much as I enjoy doing other stuff. And if you have to fake it till you make it, then fake it till you make it. George Costanza your way into medical school.
That's a really good point to bring up. So, like going out to a dinner on a Friday night or something like that, and being able to de-stress from your week and not talk about work because maybe work would stress you out. Tal and I were talking about, you know, when we get to med school, that's kind of something that would not be our experience because we're going to want to go to dinner on Friday night and talk about what happened during our week.
Yeah.
Like it's no longer a job or a stressor. I mean, I'm sure there will be plenty that it is stressful, but it's you stress. It's
Right.
every bit of that experience is going to prep you for experiences you'll have as a physician.
Absolutely. This was a great, very unstressful talk about stress.
Strong work talk.